I'm going to make a controversial statement. The dollar has always been dangerous. In this video, I'm going to explain that statement. For those who would like to read more in an article, please visit my website. It's linked in the description. So, why is the dollar dangerous? What do I mean by that? What I mean is that for borrower and lender alike, the US government has repeatedly changed the definition of what can be tendered to satisfy a dollar debt. This was true even during the old gold standard and bimetallism days. Because of these changes in definition, the dollar has always been arbitrary. Those who are creditors and debtors in dollar-denominated contracts are always at risk. Let's walk through some history and see why. This will in no way be comprehensive, only illustrative. It all began with the original definition of the dollar in 1792, or should I say definitions with an S. In this year, the first U.S. Coinage Act was passed, and the U.S. Mint was opened to the free coinage of gold and silver. A person could deposit metal with the mint, have it assayed, and then have it minted into official coins at no cost to them. The coins could then be presented to creditors to satisfy a debt. Back then, the dollar was defined to be 371.25 grains of pure silver, 416 grains of standard silver, 24.75 grains of pure gold, or 27 grains of standard gold. By the way, a grain is an old unit of measure that's no longer in use today. A troy ounce is the equivalent of 480 grains. So we can see that in 1792, a dollar was a little bit under 1 troy ounce of standard silver and a little bit more than 1/20th of an ounce of standard gold. We were on a true bimetallic system. Unless a contract specifically called for settlement in one metal or the other, either gold or silver could be tendered in settlement of a dollar-denominated debt. It was the choice of the borrower. The only requirement was that the sum of the numbers stamped on the coins equaled the number of dollars owed. We can see right away that this is an advantage for the debtor and a problem for the creditor. The problem for the creditor is that the debtor will tender whatever coin is easier to obtain. In other words, cheaper. So the dollar was never a measure of value. Think about that for a minute. Value was something that was determined by the free market. Always has been. The dollar was simply the number that the government chose to stamp on a coin. It's an accounting ledger entry signifying units of debt, nothing more. The fact that the free market determined value independent of what the government chose to stamp on a coin was a problem, not only for the creditor, but for society at large. If the free market determined that silver was the cheaper metal to obtain for settlement of debts, then silver coins would circulate and gold coins would be hoarded or melted down. They would disappear from circulation. And an obvious solution to this problem was to just adjust the definition of the dollar. In 1834, a new Coinage Act was passed that kept the definition of the dollar constant in terms of silver weight, but reduced the amount of gold that constituted the dollar. We can see here that when the new act passed, it took about 6% less gold than before to settle a dollar debt. Now, imagine being a creditor. You make a loan in dollar terms in, say, 1833, and then along comes Congress changing the definition of what is owed to you. If you maintained an accounting ledger in dollars, it would seem like an innocent change. You would receive your quote-unquote dollars, just as promised, but you would potentially receive 6% less gold than expected. No doubt the debtor was happy, but chances are you'd be less than happy. I'll say it again. The dollar was never a measure of value. It has always been the definition of debt units on a ledger to be satisfied with whatever the government chose to stamp on a coin or later print on a note. Now, we're not done. Let's move forward a little bit in time. 3 years later, the Coinage Act of 1837 was passed. Now, this was a small change, but still a change. It reduced by about 1% the amount of standard silver constituting the dollar. The definition of what had to be accepted to discharge a dollar debt remained constant until 1862. However, as stated in the notes at the bottom of this page, a major change was introduced in 1853. Now, the Coinage Act of 1853 closed the mint to the free coinage of silver. The mint could still purchase silver on the open market and stamp it into coins, but no longer could a person bring 371.25 grains of pure silver to the mint and demand that it be minted into a $1 coin. It was a significant step away from bimetallism and a clue as to what was to come. Regardless, a creditor still was required to accept official gold or silver coin in payment of debt, at least until 1862. In 1862, the U.S. government, desperate to finance its Civil War costs, passed the Legal Tender Act of 1862. This act made it compulsory for creditors to accept unbacked U.S. notes as payment of debt. It was a very controversial law because, as Section 10 of the Constitution states, no state shall coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold or silver coin a tender in payment of debts. I guess the loophole was that although states were prohibited from making anything but gold or silver coin a legal tender payment for debts, nothing said that the federal government couldn't do it. Now, the Supreme Court did rule in 1870 that the law was unconstitutional. However, a displeased President Ulysses S. Grant nominated a couple of new justices. A newly constituted Supreme Court then overturned this prior ruling. From that point forward, legal tender was part of the law of the land. So, from 1862 and onward, the government mandated that creditors must accept unbacked U.S. notes as payment of debt. Debtors were no doubt delighted. They could still tender gold or silver coin, but now they also had the choice of tendering unbacked paper, which had a dollar number stamped on it. Now, I'll say it once again. The dollar was never a unit of measure of value. It is only an accounting entry for debt. The free market determines value. Now, speaking of free market, the free market had a solution for dealing with debtors who decided to settle in these unbacked notes. Those who chose to pay for their debts in U.S. notes would often find themselves blacklisted. Word got around about their chosen method of payment, and so it became very unlikely for these particular debtors to be extended new credit in the future. The free market determined values, and in this case it also chose what it would accept as money. Still, it was the option of debtors to pay in gold coin, silver coin, and, for those who didn't care about being blacklisted, U.S. notes. That is, until 1873. In 1873, a new Coinage Act was passed. The language looked pretty innocent on the surface, but it was anything but. Silver was no longer equated with dollars, but with a new term, trade dollars. The effect was that someone who was owed a dollar debt did not have to accept silver as payment if they chose not to. The creditor still had the option to accept silver coins with official numbers stamped on them, but was not compelled by law to do so. In effect, silver was demonetized. It now had token status, much like copper. Remember, copper was always part of the monetary system this entire time. It circulated as money, but nobody was legally required to accept them in terms of payment of dollar debt. They just chose to do so. The 1873 Coinage Act was referred to as the crime of 1873 because it caused the value of silver to plummet. It was a true deflationary event because it reduced the money supply by making silver not officially recognized as money. Creditors, at least those who were paid, were enriched by this act because it made gold more dear. Debtors were decidedly not happy. So I'll say it again. The dollar has always been dangerous, for creditor and debtor alike, because the definition of what form of settlement is required for a dollar debt has been frequently changed. Then in 1933, with the passage of House Joint Resolution 192, a major change was introduced. In this act, Congress rendered the use of gold clauses unenforceable. Even if a creditor wanted to, he or she could no longer even come to a mutual understanding with a debtor that gold would be tendered in settlement. Remember how I said that any creditor who wanted to ensure he or she was paid in gold could write a gold clause into a contract specifying payment in gold? Well, this act in Congress put an end to that. From that point until 1977, contracts were written in terms of dollars, and as you know by now, lending or borrowing in dollars can be very dangerous because the government can change at any time what must be accepted in settlement. Fortunately, in 1977, it became legal once again to place gold clauses in contracts. In fact, it is still legal to do so and is part of the U.S. Legal Code in Title 31, Section 5118. As a creditor, you are free to specify in a contract that you receive gold in settlement. You can do the same with silver, by the way, and it's enforceable. Most of the time, though, I think you'll find that borrowers will be reluctant to do so. And this is especially important to realize in the case of bank deposits and bonds. When you make a bank deposit or purchase a bond, you are a dollar creditor. As a dollar creditor, you are obligated to accept as payment Federal Reserve notes, or whatever the government in the future decides is acceptable and mandatory for settlement. Now, what should be interesting to you is that you don't have to accept electronic payment. You do not have to accept a check. You do not have to accept a wire transfer. You can demand to receive physical payment, even if the debtor will always choose in that case to provide physical Federal Reserve notes when physical payment is required. If a central bank digital currency is introduced, it's going to require a change to legal tender law. So there it is, a brief history of changes to the definition of the dollar. The dollar is dangerous to both creditor and debtor. You may owe a certain number of dollars to various people, and you may also be owed a certain number of dollars, but the government may, at any time, change the rules with regards to what the creditor must accept as payment. Be careful, folks. Don't play with snakes. They bite.